Welcome to the second lesson, guys. How we doing? Let's design some RPG heroines. In this lesson, we're going to start working on our first character I want to show you guys, basically. It's a support character. I did this drawing earlier on. We can see a support character, as I said. In this case, we can see that she's more taken towards like a warrior mage kind of style. So I'm going to explain her different characteristics, telling you what I think are the most important ones when designing this character. For example, we can see that external element to channel that magic or invoke their powerful spells. In this case, we have a staff. And for example, we see that kind of ball of magic that she's making there. We also have to point out the color palette we're using, the appearance our character might have, with a peculiar hairstyle, extravagant, you know. So yeah, all these things are kind of what I have in mind of how I would represent a warrior mage, a support character, that's more or less within the parameters that are established within this style of characters. Okay, so I'm going to start differentiating the support genre. So I'm going to draw here how we would see a young mage. There's no need to sit down. Like a young support. I said young mage. So I'm going to represent the human race in our medieval world we've created to represent this character. As you can see, what I'm going to leave pretty clear is that the hairstyle, maybe the expression that this guy might have, different characteristics that are going to make these characters stand out from the rest, like from the tanks or defense guys. As you can see, I've decided to give this guy a hairstyle that's more extravagant, as I was saying. And well, this guy is going to represent a young mage. Because generally speaking, in men, we represent them as something that's a bit older in appearance, that they might have, due to age and experience that, they've acquired as an adult, as an adult mage, they might look better. However, when we're designing women, it's a little more independent, as what we're looking for is their attractive point to show. Ew. So the girl I'm going to represent now is similar to the one we have on the left. And as you can see, we're using the human race again. I'm going to give her kind of like a random hairstyle. I'm going to round off the face a little bit. And there we would have a bust of a woman as a support young mage. So I decided to give her that jewel on the forehead, like we did in the first mage. Okay, so this will be a comparison of both characters, okay? As I was saying before, in the case of men, it's more common to see them represented as a bit older due to the fact that they're normally going to have more knowledge. I mean, I don't know. So we'd rather see an older male mage than a less experienced mage in men. Like I was saying before, because to give this guy a bit more age, I grabbed the young guy's face and I made it more angled, so like sharper shapes, a sharper brow and jaw. So we're going to give him a bushy beard, long hair. Maybe I'm like looking mages that we might think of when we think of magic, so like Merlin, or maybe like some books like Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Really good book, guys. Go check that out. I'm also going to add, again, those magical ornaments that the others have as well. He has a kind of Viking look about him, but this isn't a bad thing, to be honest. Alright, so we could also find, like I was saying before, in the lesson before this one, different races in the same class of character. For example, in the case of the mage, I'm going to try and expand a little bit what I can do. And for example, I'm going to draw an elf. The only thing that's going to change would be the ears. They will be pointy and stuff, and I would maybe sharpen that jaw a little to give her a little more of a like elegant look. So a bit more, even if it's like similar to humans, she's gonna have more like of a mystical appearance, maybe even more feminine. A little bit more everything, really. If you still have any doubts about that, just look for some references to get a better base for when you're drawing. For example, the next thing we're going to look at is going to be the tools and weapons that we can see in these characters. So, as I've said a few times now, we're going to be looking at the medieval characters, so I'm going to be using staffs or wands, okay? The typical ones we might think of when we think of magic. So like a staff made of like gnarly wood, or a small and sharp wand. Maybe a little more like the ones we could see in the Harry Potter universe. In this case, however, seeing as it's like a war mage, we're going to be using a staff, something that's a bit bigger and stronger that we could see being used in defense, as well as helping us to get that aesthetic that we're looking to get in our character. It gives more potential to the presence of support that we'll see in these characters, as we can also use them as attack weapons. The next thing we can discuss within the same support class, in this case in the War Mage, is the complements that we can see, like for example rings or jewelry that in theory could give us a kind of extra magic or aid, or maybe just they increase their magic's power, whatever, right? Within the magic that we might see in a mage, we have the support of not having to think too much about this, as there are different elements within nature that are actually quite recurring themes when we're creating magic. Like in the reference images we were looking at earlier, we have fire, water, air, and earth. If you can't think of anything else to use, you could use these elements to create your own magical utensils. What I'm going to do now is get a brief color palette, the ones I've used to represent this mage. As you can see, it's a group of colors, pinks and purples. It's lovely. I chose these because of reasons, okay? As you may know, colors have meanings that can have relevance or not when applying them to your design. So in this case, I've decided to use purple as a representation of magic, royalty, mystery. It also represents power, for example. And there are a series of elements that may induce a little subconsciously into what we want to represent. For this reason, you guys can choose your palette or not, so you don't have to be obligated to say, like, oh, purple is good to represent mages and supports as a rule. You guys can look for whatever meaning in any color you want, and this way you can become inspired to design your own character. A lot of this has to do with creativity, okay? So this will be the last points that I really wanted to talk about with the supports and mages to go over the top of what we're going to look at in the next explanations. Like the action lines, or how the postures that we can reflect this character. And this will be everything, really. Yeah. So I'll see you guys in the next lesson, okay? Hope you have a good time. Bye.